Okay. You never know. I use 4 different platforms. Zoom seems to always work pretty well, but you just never know. So
I understand.
thanks for having me. Laura, great introduction. Thank you. I'll actually talk a little bit about my background further here in a second, but hopefully everybody has their coffee and everybody's got their kids settled in the building for the day. To be honest with you, after being out of the building for 2 years now, I would love to be back in there, but I also know the struggles and the challenges you all are facing right now as we go through these uncharted territories. So my thoughts and prayers are with you guys all the time. It's one of those things where I know selfishly, I'm probably best suited to help where I'm at now, but I really feel bad for the people that I left behind in Montana, because the principal that I had there as her president has really struggled trying to figure out all of this stuff. And so I'm seeing it firsthand, trying to give as much advice and mentorship to her as I can as well. But there's a lot to deal with, and you guys are all doing a fantastic job. And there'll be a special thank you here in just a second. But I get some time with you guys, and Laura was generous enough to let me kind of pick her brain a little bit about where she thought the most important information would be a priority for you guys as it refers to federal programs. And I always like to capture the value part of why federal programs are important for private schools. I've transitioned a little bit from just being the operational manager for the whole entire company nationwide to having more of a focus on the Midwest. So Missouri and Illinois are 2 of my states that I have a hyper focus on now. And I've got several states around you, to the north, I should say, more of the Midwest Great Lakes states. However, it's taught me a lot about just the different battles that we face just on a state-by-state basis and an LEA-by-LEA basis on how we manage our federal programs. I have heard over the last several years so many different stories in so many unique ways that people are being dealt with as a private non-public school in the realm of title and other federal programs that they're entitled to. And after everything transitioned from No Child Left Behind to ESSA, and all of the transition still hasn't taken place, we still don't have a guiding document for ESSA. And I don't know if that's purposeful or if that is something that will come. A lot of people are still using the giant publication from No Child Left Behind days as a guide, but that guidance is somewhat outdated on how you handle private non-public schools. And Lutheran schools, being as abundant and as important as any other private school in this country, we want to make sure as a company, even though we all come from different backgrounds. I come from the Catholic school side. Others in our company come from the Christian school side. And I've dealt with a lot of Lutheran schools, not only back in Montana, but now in my territory. We want to make sure that everybody's armed with as much information as possible. And this isn't a one-time opportunity to have a conversation with me. Right now, I'm speaking to all of you as a whole and as a leadership team under LESA as member schools of this great organization. I also want you to know that I'm a resource for you individually. I do mentor principals constantly. Right now, I probably spend half my day just talking to principals about specific issues that they're facing with their LEAs, with interpreting the law, with can I do this with my ESSER funds, can I do this with my Title II funds, and helping them not combat, but helping them put together language and guidance and documentation to send back to their LEAs to arm them with information. That's all free. That's something we never ever charge for. We don't actually make a penny back on all of the time we spend with schools unless we're providing direct services, instructional services, professional development, purchasing materials and resources, that kind of thing. So don't ever hesitate. My contact information I will put up and we'll leave up over the break between me and the next session. So I'll leave it up there, and if Laura is willing to do that as well, that will have my email and my phone number. You'll see a 406 number, which is still my Montana number, but that's my work number. And so there's lots to discuss. I'm going to hit on some high points today and kind of at the 10,000 foot level, but I know every single one of you has your own specific issues, your own uniqueness to how your LEAs, your local public schools are handling you and your title funds. Some may be using title, some may not. Some of you may have been to title workshops where you've gotten a lot of information about title. What I'm going to try to do today is get us all to the similar place. Some of this might be refresher, some of it might be information you already know, but maybe haven't heard in a while, and so it's a good reminder. But we're going to hit this for about an hour at that level, and then we'll get into some questions. And while I'm talking, I've asked Laura to kind of watch the Q&A portion. So if you have questions specific to each of the sections that I'm going to present on today, I'm going to pause at the end of each session and just see if there's any immediate questions. But even if you think of something down the way, don't hesitate to put it in there, and we'll use that as kind of the, we'll have Laura kind of mediate the conversation on questions and help us do that. But if you have one that pops up, wakes you up tonight, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I forgot to ask that guy, what is his name? Well, Laura's going to send you my presentation and all of the information, and I'll follow up with you all individually at some point in the future too, just to remind you that I'm here and available to you at any point for, if nothing else, just a conversation on how things are going and give you some assistance in whatever way I can. So hope that works for everyone. With that, I will kind of roll ahead. You will see the next screen is that of my family. If I can get this thing to move, there we go. My family consists of a person that keeps us all together. We're called her four boys. Her name is Rachel, and she is actually a retired math teacher in the Catholic school system. She taught high school and middle school math in her tenure before just managing the home full time. And so she keeps us all in line. She does a great job, and I'm blessed to have her in my life. And then we've got these four boys. The one in back with me is a junior in high school. The one to the left of her is a freshman at UNL here in Lincoln. And the one to the right is a sophomore in high school at Pius X High School. The one and only Catholic high school in town. It's 1,300 students. Huge difference from where they came from 2 years ago when we brought them from Western Montana. Where I ran Catholic schools. And their schools there consisted of about 300 kids, K-8, and a 200 student high school. So it was a big change for them. But because I felt called and was asked to come down and do more so in-depth work with private schools in the country, as opposed to just the private schools in Montana, on helping develop relationships with LEAs and manage their federal funds, I was marked, I should say, by my former superintendent who came in to build this company, who's one of the FACTS companies now. So a lot of you might be familiar with FACTS Tuition, FACTS Grant and Aid, and FACTS SIS. And you've got some great RVPs that handle that side of things. We're the fourth child of FACTS. We're FACTS Education Solutions. So my past is a little bit complicated. I grew up in a household where my dad was a teacher in the winters. And so for 9 months, he cranked as a math teacher in middle school, taught 25 years, gave hours and hours of his valuable time in the public school system to teaching in a little town called Whitefish, Montana. Little resort town, northwest-ish side of the state. If any of you have been to Glacier Park, you've been very close to Whitefish. It's just outside. If you haven't been to Northwest Montana and seen Glacier Park, please go. I'm amazed how many people, even here in Lincoln, haven't been to that part of Montana. They've been to maybe Yellowstone and seen the bison and driven through and seen the geysers and all that. The grandeur of Glacier Park is unbelievable. And they have this little thing, it's a road that goes way up over a pass called Going to the Sun Highway that goes up over Logan Pass that you can drive. It's historic. There's tons to see. Go see it. In this picture, what I'm trying to capture is, in my former life, when I was in college, I fought wildland fires. Because my dad taught in the winters, he was a smoke jumper in the summers. So the last day of school, that night, we packed all night. The next morning, we would leave and drive to McCall, Idaho, another little resort town in the middle of Idaho, north of Boise. And we would unpack our stuff in married housing, just like a married student housing. And he would work as a smoke jumper. He did that for 25 years. So he ended up retiring from both the Forest Service and as a school teacher. And during that time, I started figuring out how to value resources. And the reason why I talk about valuing resources is we have so many resources that sometimes we don't even know about that are available to us. The group of gentlemen that are on the left-hand side, you'll see this is one of the things that first taught me about the value of resources, because as we finished with a fire, we had to get all of our equipment out. And just our jump gear alone was 70 pounds worth of equipment. So having the resources available to us, like sharing loads, sharing the equipment, equalizing our packs, having helicopters sling lined stuff out. We had the availability of resources like jet boats. If we were on the Salmon River, we could get a jet boat ride. We could get a pack train of mules to come in and pack our stuff out as we walked. So early on, I started understanding the value of having resources available to me. Fast forward that to my first principalship when I turned 24. I was asked by my current boss, and then at that time, my superintendent of the Diocese of Helena, to move from just being a basketball coach and a teacher in the public schools and a smoke jumper in the summers, if I wanted to become a vice principal athletic director. So I took the initiative, jumped in. It was one of the greatest years of my life, and it only lasted a year. The following year, I became the principal, and mostly out of necessity. He had to move on. He was the president and the superintendent of the diocese, plus running the high school. So obviously he couldn't do all of that, but just like you, many hats. And we had to take one of those hats away because he just could not do 20-hour days for much longer. And so I took over as principal of Loyola Sacred Heart High School, which is part of Missoula Catholic Schools, and that's the logo in between. During that time, I was the principal and athletic director. 4 short years later, I became the president of the system. So I oversaw a K-8 and a high school. And during that time, I realized I backed up into a year where when I was on fire in 2000 in Southwest Montana, where if any of you remember the fire season of 2000, it rivals the fire season that we're seeing now in the national news, except it was more focused in Western Montana and the Rocky Mountains. And during that summer, I actually met a gentleman who had a daughter who struggled in school. And when I got into Catholic schools, he came to me and said, I don't know if you remember our conversation on this fire back in 2000, but I want my daughter here, and can you support her academically? And at the time, we really didn't have much outside of just the standard operational academic courses, and we didn't have a lot of resources outside of that for extended services, including title. That's when I really got honed in on, where do I go to get more resources? Where do I go to get more money, supplemental instruction through title, IDEA funds? Finally started working with my public school system there, and it was a great relationship that we built. And that valuable relationship turned into a lot of additional resources I was able to bring in, and that actually created a lot of value for our school system. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today is, are we capitalizing on the resources that we have through federal programs to make sure that we, one, are attractive to additional families, to families that maybe have students that struggle. A lot of times, as you know, families sometimes are not sure that their student can handle a private school because of the academic rigor and the reputation that the school has for high academics. Sometimes that scares families away. But if we can rest them assured that we have additional resources, we have a Title I program if they start to slip behind, we have IDA funds if they need to have those level of services, even though those are apples and oranges from one another. The important thing is that we had additional resources available to us through the public system that through LESA and through IDEA were supposed to be coming our way. It took years to really feather that out so that it worked seamlessly, to get to the point where the contact that I had at the LEA, who usually changed every couple of years because it was a principal that was, the private non-public representative for federal programs. So I'd have to retrain somebody every couple of years on how this worked because they didn't really know. They just had the title. And so it really became a value-added part of our instruction. The one thing that I really wanted to focus on and to pause to say to you guys is, I know that the most valuable resource is the people in our schools. That's the students, the parents, the teachers, the principals, the presidents, whatever the structure is at the leadership level that you all have in your individual school systems. Please take this as an honest and sincere thank you for sticking around through all of this. This has been a really tough time, I know, for everyone. And with what Laura said about so little turnover, I think you guys bucked the system. I think, you know, from the private schools that I've worked with, we've lost a lot of great leaders through this process. We've lost a lot of great teachers in this process, teachers that were going to give 30 years, but after 28 with COVID and all the things they were going through, they're like, you know what, time for me to exit. I just can't do this. So we lost a lot of value added resources, but specifically the most important resource, some of our people. So thank you for sticking around. Thank you for doing what you do. I can relate to what you're doing only to the point of regular operational elements and all the things you deal with outside of COVID, because I'm not in a building dealing with COVID. This is a 100-year event, and you guys have the special experience of getting to deal with COVID and all the challenges it brings. So hopefully when we're done with this today, I give you some valuable resources and start a conversation in your mind anyways that maybe we could follow up with, and you want to continue that with me, or just something that you can use to launch more value for your schools. This is just a quick overview of kind of the topics we're going to cover today. Just kind of a quick reminder overview of Title I, II, III, and IV, what those are, about how much is available nationally. Congress reallocated funds this year at a similar level, probably just a little bit more. So hopefully, if you haven't received your allocations, which a lot of, I know in Illinois schools have not yet received their final allocations, we're estimating about at the same levels, if there isn't any major movement of students in your system that are free and reduced, to a little bit higher uptick in the title allocations that are coming. We just received some title allocations in Iowa, and for Title II, they all went up a little bit. So my hope is that that's going to be nationwide, that everybody gets a little bit more Title II across the board. We're going to talk about consultation, how important that is, what you should be expecting, what you should be experiencing, and then talking about a lot of common issues that I see with consultation. Consultation is one of the biggest topics I talk to principals about, because there's such a variety of actual consultation going on. So we're going to talk about what it should be versus what its experience-wise has been, and talk about some different scenarios that I've heard, all the way down to blending IDEA and title funds. I just rolled out Title I, II, and IV services at a couple of schools that some of you are probably familiar with. Sister Thea in East St. Louis. We're now serving about $200,000 worth of title services for them. We've hired several teachers. We hired a counselor and a speech therapist, actually, that we're providing through title funding, managing their ESSER funds as well. So there's a lot going on just in my first year of getting into this position, and really specifically in Southern Illinois, because the Diocese of Belleville has been so welcoming, and I went down and was able to present. That's kind of where I got hooked up with Laura, is the RVPs in the area said, you gotta talk to LESA, and Laura is your go-to there. And so fast forward, here I am. I'm available for any of you at any time, just so that, because Missouri is my state as well. So I want to make sure that we spread the love and spread the value as much as possible. We'll talk about pooling funds. That's something that's fairly new, that the DOE came out last year pretty heavily on and gave us that new guidance in October, which, you know, who knows if anybody remembers last October, which is almost a year ago, seems like it's 10 years ago now. But that guidance that came out for Title I, there was specific scenarios in there where they talk about pooling between schools under one LEA or multiple LEAs, which should make the process a little bit easier if we can get LEAs up to speed. And I'll talk more about the Diocese of Belleville, because that's something we're working on there, and it might be something to consider for the Lutheran system of schools as well. Even though you're all fairly independent, being able to pool your resources can add a lot of value as well. We'll talk about the latest legislative action. Some of you probably have heard some of it. We'll just go through and talk a little bit about what might be coming. It's not all good news, of course, for private schools, but it is news. We'll talk about kind of what we do as a whole, and we're here to help, and these are some of the things that we're doing for you to consider you might use a third party for. Doesn't have to be us, but we want you to know that this is available to you. And I'll explain a little bit about that at the end, and then we'll spend some time doing some Q&A. So first, our title overview. Title I, most of you are very familiar with Title I, I'm assuming, because it's usually the most commonly used. It's also the best funded title program from the federal government. And if you remember how the money flows from the federal congressional budgeting platforms through Congress approving the budget every year, that money flows down to the states. The states distribute Title I through poverty level. And don't let me forget, we'll talk about ESSER in this as well, because as we know, ESSER is now being forced through Title I channels as well. But there's a lot of money in Title I. And this year, for the 2021 school year, $16.3 billion was allocated to Title I programs across the country. Now, about, I think we're about $3 billion of that or so has been earmarked, because that makes up the chemistry for private schools, independent schools, and other schools that states have adopted. Some of them are charter schools, some of them call them different things, but those schools are still receiving Title I funds as well. So a significant portion of the Title I money is being allocated to the states and down to you guys as individual schools. The whole purpose of Title I is to improve educational opportunity for disadvantaged students based on poverty. So it's a poverty disadvantaged student. And if you go all the way back to the LBJ days, when ESEA was first enacted in the 60s, he took on this whole concept of, I'm going to take on poverty by giving more money from the federal government to the local schools. And this is where a lot of the balance of local control versus federal control started to become a little more burdensome and became more of a battle. And on a side note, I'm sorry about my headphones. As you can tell, I talk with my hands a lot, and this kind of isolates all the distractions in my house and everything else. So my apologies for looking like I'm flying an airplane, but hopefully that's not too big of a distractor for you. So Title I, during the 60s, when it was first enacted, there's been a lot of iterations of it over the course of the years. ESEA, the foundational elements of it are still part of ESSA, but ESSA has added on layers and given a lot more control over a lot of the process for private schools. And that's one thing that I've noticed that some LEAs have really resisted, because under No Child Left Behind, those of you that were doing title services at that time, principals in the private school were told what to do. This is what you will get for your money. You might sometimes you would get to know how much money you got. Sometimes they didn't bother to tell you, and there wasn't really a requirement for them to tell you, because it was very directed. ESSA, when it came into law, really was intended to give and empower the private schools to be more in the process cooperatively of providing the services. And that's really where third-party opportunities came to be, and that's where FactSet came to be. Once ESSA was approved and third parties were allowed to provide services outside of just the LEAs doing it, if the private school requested a third party, the LEA is required to say, if they say no to that, they have to have a good reason why they say no. And I've only heard a couple of good reasons. Usually it's related to timing. They've already hired a teacher to serve the private school. That person's under contract, so we can't move to a third party because it's too late. That's justifiable because they have somebody under contract to provide those services. So then that becomes a conversation for the next year. Sometimes the LEA, the public school, is ready to get out. They're like, please let somebody else manage your money and your resources and your services, which is it's a win-win for both the private school and the public school, because we take a lot of that management burden off of both. But when it comes to Title I, the whole goal of this program is to really impact the educational achievement of the school. And if you're targeting the students that bring in the money, remember that's two parts. The students that bring in the money are the demographically disadvantaged students under poverty findings, whatever the district uses for poverty findings, versus students that test that fall below grade level or at risk of falling below grade level are the ones that actually receive it. Those might not be the same students. Your disadvantaged students that are bringing in the money may not need the services that the money provides. So those are two different characteristics that are often confused. Apples and oranges. The students that bring in the money are the free and reduced students, or whatever poverty level is used for calculations. Those aren't necessarily the students that are receiving the services. But these are the things that it's intended to do. PD for teachers. Teachers that provide instruction to Title I eligible students. So if there are Title I eligible students identified through a testing mechanism that you have worked out with the LEA as your criteria for getting kids qualified for Title I, teachers of those students, even in the main classrooms, are eligible to use Title I dollars for professional development. That's the only caveat. If you use Title I for PD, it has to be for Title I teachers of Title I students. And then, of course, the parent engagement is a big part of that. This is just a kind of a summary recap. It's got to be supplemental. It can't be part of the regular mainstream classroom. The program has to be supplemental to what the students are already receiving. It cannot supplant or replace what is already going on in the classroom. So if they're struggling in math, they go to their regular math classroom, plus they're getting pulled out during lunch, recess, or they're going after school, or however the school decides to give that supplemental instruction to the students with a Title I dedicated teacher. Those students are getting additional help in math. But it's got to be fair, equitable, and it's got to be related to significant opportunities that are available to those students to actually become more academically proficient. And it should be tracked. It should be, and the LEA should be asking for, okay, let's look at the test data in the fall versus the test data in the winter and in the spring. If you're a MAP school, or if you're a STAR school, or whatever assessment you use, we want to monitor growth to make sure that it's having an impact. If it's not, let's adjust and do something different for those kids. It's really, again, focused on the academic achievement of low achieving students, but it comes from low income families. The district should be using the same measure for you to receive your equitable share of the funds that it's receiving for Title I. It's using a poverty measure. The most common, I just gave two examples here. There are several versions of poverty measure that can be used, but by far the most common is the National School Lunch Program. If that free and reduced lunch program, as most people call it, is not being used, or you do not have access to that at your private school, then the LEA has to figure out how to survey your families to get that information. Some will try to force you to do a free and reduced survey to your families. That is something that is a common conversation, because some LEAs are asking private schools to survey their families for free and reduced, but the private schools don't have real good luck with that. Well, you can extrapolate the information. So if you send out 100 surveys to 100 students' families, and you only get 10 back, and 3 of those are free and reduced qualified, then 30% of your population is free and reduced, because they should be able to extrapolate the information and apply it to your whole student body. Sometimes that's usually a benefit for the private school, but most LEAs, that's the best that they can get, and so they'll use that method, and that's something we can talk about in detail if we have a conversation down the road about it. This is a lot of what the services look like in the supplemental classroom outside of the regular classroom. We do a lot of before and after school programs in our providing of services to schools. This last summer, especially with ESSER funds, we did a ton of summer school. Home tutoring, counseling, we've hired several counselors this year using both title funds as well as ESSER funds. Mentoring, one-on-one, computer-assisted instruction. Our Title I teachers actually come with a package deal with a blended learning model of instruction, utilizing ExactPath, which is an Edmentum product, which is in a computer-assisted instruction that's really easy to use for teachers and has a lot of oversight values and is really hyper-focused on the students' greatest needs. But all of these things are options for Title I. Title II, a lot less money. Title I, if you remember, I didn't speak to it, but it said in that slide, Title I is more than all the other titles combined. Well, Title II is about $2.1 billion. Again, the fair share for private non-publics, really what that money, which is based on purely your enrollment, What that money's for is professional development for all of your teachers. That's to simply impact the instructional environment and the education of students nationwide. And so that's where Betsy DeVos was trying to get the allocations for ESSER to go down more of the Title II distribution method model. But Congress wanted a Title I, and so she lost that battle. It came down through Title I means. Title II is based on purely enrollment. So whatever your enrollment figures are that you put for out to your LEAs last year, those dollars are then allocated based on those, and it should ebb and flow a little bit based on purely your enrollment. But it's intended for providing professional development for all of your teachers. Everybody's qualified for that if they're an instructional element of your school. That can be instructional aides. That can be, for some places, we actually have front office staff who are using the SIS system to monitor classroom behavior and different things. That technically qualifies. Some LEAs like to fight that, but that should be a qualifying factor. So you can get a lot of staff PD for your teachers through Title II. Again, its purpose is simple. We want to improve the quality of education by giving teachers, leadership, and other instructional staff as much professional development opportunities as possible, but based on your unique needs. So FACTS takes that to another level. When we provide PD for schools, we actually custom build every PD session for every individual school or system of schools. We just did a diocese of Sioux City up here just north of us in Lincoln. We did a 25 virtual session series on blended learning, but opportunities related to COVID on having to distance learn and virtually teaching. We did a lot of sessions on how to use Google Classroom because that's the platform that most of the schools are using. So we custom built it based on what their needs were, and the schools could individually select the sessions that most pertain to their greatest need. As you can imagine, with 30 schools in the diocese, everybody's needs were a little bit different, so they were able to focus in. But it has to meet the private school use requirements you see here. The LEAs need to make sure that you get your equitable share, and it's a really simple calculator for making sure that whatever the allocation is to the LEA that should be available on the state website, you are getting your equitable share. It's always good to check the dollars. Sometimes they just make a mistake in the spreadsheet. Sometimes there's a calculation error. We found those. We found LEAs that have misappropriated Title II funds for years. Actually, just in the East St. Louis side, there's a school over there I'm working with, one of the Catholic high schools, that has a lot of students, and they were only receiving about $500 in Title II. It just didn't even make sense. That was impossible. So we backtracked and figured out that they had been misallocating them for 3 years because a new person had come in, a new allocation system had been built, and they had an error, but it wasn't caught. It just didn't make sense, and nobody really thought about it until I had talked to this principal about it, and I just said that doesn't make sense. For your student population, that is a fraction of what you should be getting. So it's always good to check and know exactly how the calculations are being derived. The one issue that LEAs will sometimes push very hard, Madison, Wisconsin is a perfect example because we're dealing with that right now, but they want evidence-based. They want to know exactly what the school's needs are, and they want every single school to do a needs assessment. That may or may not be the case at your LEA, but it is an expectation under ESSA that Title II PD that is being provided to the school should be based on what the Title II plan is under the district that they have sourced from you for their private non-publics. So as we get to consultation, we'll talk more about that, but that is something that is sometimes forgotten in all of this. And then all of a sudden the LEA will say, oh, I forgot, I have to have a document that tells me what your needs assessment was for PD for the year. And so it's something that they may or may not require of you. It may or may not be something that you're going to have to do down the road. Title III, English language learners. A lot less money, but still a lot of money out there for private schools as well. If you have English language learners that have been identified, you should be getting Title III money. Every state manages Title III a little bit differently. In the Midwest, I find a lot of times that the area education agencies I don't know as much about Missouri yet because I just got to Missouri recently, but in Illinois, Iowa, and other places, the AEAs manage all of the Title III funds for the schools in their regions. Um, a lot of times, however, for example, in Des Moines, Title III is managed by the district for some reason. So the Des Moines allocation for private non-publics is actually kept at Des Moines public school system, and the school system manages Title III. So all the other schools in Iowa are managed by their AEAs, except for the Des Moines city schools. Go figure. Typical state by state uniqueness. But it's really intended to make sure that we provide instruction to students that either themselves are English language learners, or if their family members in their household are not primary English language speakers. So that's an important distinction to make, because sometimes our students might be fluent in English, but there might be a little bit of a gap in their English proficiency, because when they go home, they're only speaking Spanish or they're only speaking another foreign language, and that needs to be identified. So those students have to be tested. If you haven't looked into Title III, I would ask about it. If you think you have English language learners in your school, it's not as common, especially in smaller private schools, unless you're in a community that has a lot of transient families that are moving from different locations because their parents are different harvesters, or they follow the growth seasons, those kinds of things. That happens a lot in the Midwest, but I'm not sure in your specific cases how many of students in your school systems and in your individual schools will be EL qualified, but it's always worth the look-see. The LEA required activities are, you have to have, if you have qualifying students, you have to provide a language instruction. You have to have some sort of bona fide research-based language instruction tool that is being used. In our Title III services that we provide in Des Moines, we have a program that's very similar to Exact Path that actually has a Spanish side, so that as the students that are very heavily English language learner deficient, they can start in Spanish, but then they quickly move to English, because you can't keep students in Spanish unless you immerse them in English. So you've got to make proficiency, but you have to have a language instruction program, and somebody has to be overseeing the instruction of that. So there's got to be somebody that's responsible for English language learners. Even though some states even require you identifying a Title III person in your building, you may not actually have Title III eligible students, but sometimes just having an identified person in case you do have somebody that moves into the school during the course of the year, then you can take action and provide services for them. There's also professional development available for English language learners. We did a huge workshop in January for all the teachers of Des Moines private schools, had over 150 teachers that went through an English language learner training module with one of our specialists, because every single one of the teachers in those schools still has the EL students in their regular classrooms. And then we have dedicated EL teachers that are helping them supplementally through direct Title III instruction. So everybody needs PD on how to handle and how to best help English language learner students. Title IV is the catch-all bucket. Every time there's a school shooting, every time that there's other safety measures or technology issues that reach the national level and the media picks up on it, the government takes action and more money is allocated, it usually all goes to Title IV. Why? Because it's the most liberal use of the funds. It can be given out as grants, or it can be distributed through regular allocation means. I've seen some states that distribute Title IV strictly through enrollment, just like you do with Title II. They just give the proportionate share. They give guidelines. We want you to use it under these three categories, which are these: well-rounded educational opportunities, safe and healthy students, effective use of technology. Probably, like you guys, you can probably all think of anything that you could spend money on. You could relate to one of these three things. Well, it's really hard for an LEA if this is the direct guidance that they're giving under ESA, which is, with Title IV. ESA really keeps these bullets broad, and that's intentional because they want a lot of flexibility in the use of the funds. These particular these particular states that just use these are probably less common than states that have very directed uses of their Title IV funds. So if you haven't yet, or you utilize Title IV, there's a good chance that you might have gotten a Title IV document from the district saying, this is what our district or our state is using Title IV for. And that is okay. That's equitable, because whatever the state and the local LEA are doing with their Title IV money, so do the private schools. That's just the unfortunate way that it works. The opportunity for you to expand that is when the LEAs and the state are building the title plans. So you want to be part of the conversation for building Title IV if you want to expand outside of those parameters that they've given you for using Title IV. Title IV has been used a lot for PD. On top of the Title II funds, Title IV funds are usually very readily available for additional PD for all your teachers. Sometimes Title IV funds are moved into Title I, which is acceptable and allowable by federal law. The LEAs or all of the schools in Des Moines are asked by the district, do you want to move your Title IV funds into Title I? And if so, how much? So they give them the option. Some states, some LEAs, just do it automatically. All Title IV money's in Title I, because that's what they do district-wide. And that's actually acceptable. But it takes the unfortunate side of that is then the use of that money is more stringently captured under Title I. And so it limits the use of those funds a little bit more.
Jeremy, can I pause you for it? Oh, good. Looks like you're at a
Yep, I was just getting ready to pause.
So we have some questions.
Okay.
And one, Michelle's asking in particular what you just said, that the Title IV money in her district was rolled into Title I and they don't participate. Actually, I have a feeling when I was principal at Abiding Savior down the road, access to Title I was very, very limited because it had to do with school, like the poverty rate in the certain school attendance area and whom we could service in our school that needed, it only like 1 or 2 kids every year. So
yep. And we're going to get into the 3-prong test here in a second, because not only does a school have to have students that qualify as free and reduced or whatever qualifying factor they use, the school has to be in a title, or the students have to come from a title eligible public school boundary.
Right.
So in some schools, especially middle school and high school, that gets harder because a lot of LEAs just limit their Title I resources to K-5 schools. So there's a lot of variance in that, but that is part of the test. Obviously, they have to qualify for services on top of that, as Title I services are needed because based on test scores, et cetera.
So if that public school, if that LEA has decided to roll their Title IV funding into the Title I, does that mean that our Lutheran school doesn't participate? Does that mean they just lose out on that money?
Well, and that's, in my mind, that's not equitable, because if they're rolling the money where you would normally be eligible for the Title IV funds and it makes those funds unavailable to you, that is kind of a sly way to take money away from private schools. Okay. And so I would request, as a principal, as the LEA's primary contact, I would request that your funds are not transferred and just see what response you get. If you get a favorable response, great. Work that, make that happen. They can and they should consider and give you good reason if they disagree with that. They should consider not allowing your Title IV funds, because they know what the allocation is. They can hold those out. Those are your funds. Those should be available to you. Just take the tactic that, because those funds are not available to us, if they're moved to Title I, that's not equitable. I don't have access to that. That doesn't meet that threshold of an under ESA. And definitely I can help with that language, because I can pull it right out of the guidance and send it to the principal that's dealing with that, so that they can forward that on with their name attached to it and soften it, or however they want to, based on their relationship with the LEA, however they want to approach it. That's something I can help them source.
Okay, great. We have a couple other questions pop up regarding the Title IIA funds. What would a needs assessment document look like?
So that is actually, there's a wide variety. There is no sole document. There used to be, under No Child Left Behind, a Title II needs assessment document that was available in the Bible that I was talking about. That has not been produced by the DOE yet. So states some have their own. Some just say, whatever assessment you want to use. I've seen schools put out a needs assessment that's one paragraph. Please tell me what your priority needs are, and they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for professional development, and the teachers just listed it. So really, it's just a survey. It could be simple. If the LEA is really wanting you to use their survey, then you can modify it to put your own information, your school header or whatever on it. But typically the LEAs are programmed to, as long as you have a document, for them it's all about documentation so they don't get in trouble by the state. So as long as they know you have one, you're using it, it could be your own.
Okay. Here's this one. In Fort Zumwalt, one of our school districts here, the public school district, this principal, she has to complete a spreadsheet that lists the grade, the student needs, teacher strengths, teacher area of needs, and proposed professional development and estimated cost. Nice. I do this at the beginning of the year, but can change it. Like she's sharing how they.
That's a lot of detail.
And perhaps we could start a shared Google folder or something if other people have, if that would be helpful. If you want to send me your samples, if your school is doing something like that, if you just want to send that to me, and I can post those things into a folder. This one's a very specific question. Hold on a second. About a student that's from Jamaica who technically speaks English but has a very different dialect. And there seems to be a lack of understanding, and it's a kindergarten student. Would that student be eligible for Title III, even though he speaks English? It's just different.
Yeah, if it's not his native language, then he automatically is available and should probably be tested. So whatever language assessment you have access to, the district might have a language assessment you can give. At the kindergarten level, it's a little bit like IDEA in a way, where at the kindergarten level, they might have specialists in the district that could help you perform an assessment. But typically the district will need an assessment that shows the need. They'll just have to have some data to support the fact that it can't just be that the kid is English language is not his primary language. That might be enough, but sometimes the districts will want an assessment. And so that's just a quick back to the LEA, say, I've got this kid, English is not his first language. They speak a different language at home. How do I get him assessed so I can get access to Title III funds for him? Keep it all about the kid, the LEA.
I think in this case, his home language is English, but it's a different dialect.
Okay, dialects are also allowable under Title III.
Okay, all right, thanks for the clarification on that. And Al Freeman, Al is our, Jeremy is our Missouri District Education Executive, who's been very involved with MOCAPE, our state's Council for American Private Education. He works with them on a lot of things, and he just noted that the ESEA allows for the money to be rolled into Title I, and yes, he's recognizing that is an issue, but that our MOCAPE is working on that. So
great,
awesome. Got some support on that.
It's great to have support on all those issues. Yeah. It is allowable to move things to Title I. You can't go the other way. So some districts, they just think it's easier to just put it all in one bucket, but that doesn't allow some schools to participate exactly like that example. So,
right.
Are we good?
That's it for now. Yes.
All right. Well, I just wanted to jump into consultation because consultation is so important, but it's not happening regularly enough and at the right levels for a lot of schools. And so I just want to plant some seeds on how consultation should go for you. And if it's not going this way, trying to make sure that you get more out of your consultation in the future, I think is very important for principals to understand, because you do have rights. Under ESA, private school principals have rights, just more so than ever before. If some LEAs are stuck in a rut from No Child Left Behind days, which I still see, if I ask for clarification for principals, they'll send me a No Child Left Behind document, and I'll shoot them back an ESA document that supersedes it. So sometimes you just have to deal with the LEAs as you get information from them and how they respond. really will a lot of times become, okay, based on that response, we'll go this way with it. So equitable participation, everybody's probably heard this term before, but what does it mean? It really just means simply that you get the equal and proportionate share of allocation of those funds for your school. We talked about Title I being based on poverty level. We want to make sure that we check our allocation amounts every year just to make sure that something doesn't look really off. But remember also in consultation, they're required to tell you how your allocation was derived. It is an expectation under ESA, and there's some very clear language in the guidance that LEAs are required to show how they came up with your dollar amount. What is their calculation? What did they use for your low-income families? What did they use for your total population? How much money came to the district? How was that divided up amongst all the schools in the district, including yours? So that equitable and proportionate share of all those funds is important to make sure that you are double checking it. It doesn't have to take a long time. You can send it to me, send me your allocation document and say, does this look right? I can do a quick check on it just because it's something I do all the time, and I'm happy to help out. Take that time suck off your plate, because sometimes those time sucks are just too, there's so many of them, especially dealing with these supplemental services that you don't want to, you're not able to step away. That's fine. I'm happy to help do that. I do that all the time. Here's the three-pronged test. Private student eligibility for Title I, the school that the student resides in. If they were to not attend your private school, they would attend the public school in their area. Is that school a public Title I school? It doesn't have to be a school-wide Title I school. It just has to be a Title I eligible school. Does the private school attending, or does the student attending the private school meet the eligibility requirements? Meaning, does the test that the LEA is asking you to show, and you have oftentimes now under ESA, the private school has a lot more flexibility in providing student eligibility requirements of their own, because nobody knows your students better than you do. And one big change from No Child Left Behind to ESA was, believe it or not, principals used to have to send test data to the public schools, and the public school would qualify students. That is no longer the case, nor is it confidential to do that. So really all they should be asking now is send me a list of students. It doesn't even have to, it shouldn't necessarily even be their names as much as it should be a count. And your requirement then, your responsibility is to make sure that you have that data available in case there's an audit. And if you know LEAs, you know the number one thing that they're most afraid of is an audit by the state. The state is most afraid of an audit by the federal government. So everybody plays this CYA game where I think most of the time with LEAs, they want to do what's right. But at the same time, if you see that they're qualifying students or doing something a little goofy or not giving you the ability to qualify your own students, you got to call them on that and say, no, that's for us to do. And we use map testing, teacher referral, and whatever assessment, classroom assessment data. So whatever your eligibility requirements are, that should be shared during consultation. If they have a problem with that, they have to justify why they have a problem with that. That's a huge difference as why private schools have more flexibility now and have more leverage in eligibility of their students. And the private school student being identified as a Title I student for those purposes. 3 keys to successful consultation is timely, meaningful, and ongoing. These 3 things are broken down individually as timely being, they should occur before decisions are made. Realistically, I would say timely is probably one of the biggest issues that I hear from principals most often, where I haven't even been talked to by my district. They haven't even reached out to me, and it's already September and we're starting the school year. They should have reached out and started the process for the current school year the previous January. That's where you see under recommended, that January blob. Think of this as a school fiscal year, that October being the fall, January, April, summer. January is where you start talking about the next year, at least starting the conversation and consultation process. April is usually where initial allocations might be available. The LEA might be able to say to you, this is what the state is telling us is we're going to use last year's numbers minus 10% just to start services and get allocations moving so that you can start planning for services with your third party or with us as an LEA providing your services. Summer, the actual services should be refined. So there should be another meeting in the summer to say, okay, if the LEA is providing services, here's how much staffing you're getting. Let's set up a schedule based on your teaching schedule that works best for supplemental instruction for the Title I teacher to pull kids out, and resources are getting ordered and all of those things. The final October, really, and this somewhere between summer and October is where final allocation amounts come out. Those are just now starting to come out from some of the states. October, though, should be a check on how are things going? How did implementation go? How's the Title I teacher doing? If you have somebody like FactSed providing your services on behalf of the public school, providing those to your private school, how's FactSed doing? Are you having good success with them? And then talking about that, consultation never stops, even if you have somebody like FactSed provide your services. That should be something that never ends, is consultation. They might not be actively managing your services if you have a third-party provider, but they're still required by law to consult with you every year. Consultation should be meaningful. The best way that I've found to describe this is how I typed it up here. It should be a real opportunity for you to have your needs met and discussed. So there should be no decision made by the LEA until after they've sat down with you and said, okay, for Title I, what issues are you having? How do you want to set up your program? What are your needs? Do you need PD for your Title I teachers and your regular classroom teachers that teach Title I kids in their mainstream classroom? Those thoughts should be expressed, they should be listened to, and they should be considered. That doesn't mean they're always going to say yes, and unfortunately the LEA still has the final decision. However, they should, and this is a requirement under ESSA that is very clear and a huge change from No Child Left Behind on top of you identifying your own kids, is the fact that you have a lot more say in the consultation. Title II, what do you want to do for PD for your teachers? That is important. You should be given a genuine opportunity to have a conversation and to be heard. Ongoing, again, like I said, they should be a recommendation by the DOE and by us is 4 times a year. If your LEA reaches out to you once a year, and especially if they don't ever meet with you in person or right now virtually in person, then tell them, I need to have a consultation, and push them on it. Say, you refer to the guidance and say, the Department of Ed expects 4 times a year for us to have a conversation. That's their recommendation. And I have some questions for you. I'd really like to set up a meeting. And it should be mutually beneficial to you for time. It shouldn't be, on Good Friday of Easter week that they schedule a meeting for your consultation. It should be a time that works for you when, it also works for them, mutually acceptable time. So that's also ongoing and meaningful part of this. Topics these are the 12 that we pick out as the primary topics, and we have a checklist if you need one, just in document form that I can shoot to you. There's actually a nice list in the new compliance documents or in the new guidance document that came out in October for Title I consultation. There's a really nice list in there, and these are all on it. I've highlighted in red some of the things that we find the most issues with. So a lot of times, the hearing what your needs of the private students and teachers are, they should hear and add those into their own title plan that they're turning into the state. How are their decisions made? What type of poverty data are they collecting? That you should be able to ask them, and they should be able to tell you. The amount of funds that are available for services, if they don't know final allocations, they should at least give you what their estimates are that they're working off of for their own public schools for title. How it's calculated, what do they use? When they get the allocation from the state, how is it calculated and proportioned to the different schools? How about for you specifically? If they're providing services for you, what are the size and scope of services that they're going to offer? That money goes only so far. So it's only fair that you know how much money is being gobbled up in salary and benefits, resources for the teacher, other fees that they have to pay on behalf of them. that really gives you an understanding of, okay, this is what it really costs me to have this title person. I get $10,000 a year. I get, 2 hours a week of title services. Can I stretch that farther? Is there any way to get more bang for my buck? They should talk to you about assessments that they use for services to be allocated to students that need it. Is there an assessment tool that they recommend? They should be asking you, what assessment tool are you going to use? What are you going to use to identify students for the Title I program? Pooling of funds. They should very seriously be talking about, if there are other schools that have needs like yours, do you want to pool your Title II funds to do more PD with a bigger audience, get more bang for your buck again? Do you want to pool your Title I resources and share a teacher? There's lots of ways to do that. You can pool money together, or you can, like I just hired, actually, Trinity Lutheran up in Boone, Iowa, is partnering with the Catholic school. They still have their individual allocations, and they're hiring a common Title I teacher for 5 hours a day. So that's the beauty of that, is the principals, they get to choose and recommend the teachers to us to hire. So they have people identified in both of their systems that we're going to choose from and hire them. They're going to work with our account manager, Brian Boteva is his name, that works the Midwest for me. He's going to sit with them, get the teacher onboarded, train them, get them set up with ExactPath and all of the tools for the blended learning program that they need, and then work with the two principals to set up their schedule. For those 20 hours a week, how do you want to share them? Do you want them at Trinity Lutheran 3 days a week or 2 days a week, and at Sacred Heart Catholic School 3 days a week? How are we going to share that? And it's usually divided based on their allocation amounts. So we try to come up with a percentage, and then we just bill separately for the expenses of the teacher providing those services. And that's on us. So it's a way of pooling without actually having to pool under the LEA. So there's lots of ways to do it. One thing that's that I found very interesting is in the document that came out in October, the new guidance, there's an expectation that they talk to you about, do you want a third-party provider? It should actually be offered and considered in case the LEA isn't a good fit for you. If it hasn't been a good experience, and trust me, I see entire ends of the spectrum, from great experiences with Title I teachers from the LEA to horrible experiences and everything in between. And realistically, they should offer third-party options to you. You always have a say. Do you want a third party? If so, they have to give it considerable, or they have to give it strong consideration. And if they say no, they have to justify their no. And that usually it's hard to do. Student assessments, again, kind of more detail of, what kind of student assessments are being used. How do we want 3 assessments to be used, or we just one test data bank or data point, maps or whatever at the end of the year will qualify kids for the next year. More specifically, what do they want you to provide on your side for making sure that students qualify? What assessments are going to need to be on record to show that those Title I students are in fact eligible? The fund allocation, how are the funds being allocated? I know that sounds a lot like the previous slide, but this one is more specifically honed in on, those funds for Title I, II, III, and IV, how are those specifically identified for my school? And are they being calculated correctly? And that's why you want to be armed in at least a general way of how do fund allocations should work. What are they based on? I know my poverty level is higher than that. Why am I only getting $5,000? How much per student am I getting? Because the same per student funding rate the district uses for their own students, they have to use for you. The same rate that they use for student counts per pupil for Title II has to be the same for you. That's the equitable share part. What's the complaint process? If you have an issue with services that are being provided, whether it's the LEA themselves or a third party like FactSed, and you have an issue, how do you express your concerns? That should be a topic. What kind of poverty data does the district want you to use? If you don't have access to the same poverty data, what poverty data are you going to use in place of it? Pooling of funds, this is a quick one. This is now, if you look in the guidance, you'll see these 2 scenarios. This is actually a pretty meaningful way to take smaller allocation amounts and make more get more service out of smaller amounts by sharing the resources among schools under a single LEA. So this is pooling funds within an LEA. So if one LEA serves multiple private schools, you can band together and ask that 1, 2, 3, or all of you pool your Title I money so that you could share a Title I teacher. So this is actually happening in West Dubuque, Iowa. We have three Catholic schools there that are pooling their money, and we're providing one Title I teacher. They have all pooled $60,000. We're supplying a bunch of resources and a Title I teacher at full time with benefits so that we could find, so they wanted us to make it full benefit eligible because there's a teacher shortage and they wanted to make it attractive. So we hired somebody that's fully benefit eligible, and that gobbled up, a significant amount of that money, but it gave them a full-time person. Other than getting a paycheck from FACS-Ed, they look like a regular teacher in the building. They're just the Title I teacher. And we work with them directly to provide that service on behalf of West Dubuque Public School System. So this is one way to pool within a single LEA. The other option is pooling amongst LEAs. So you can actually ask one LEA, if you have a student body that comes from multiple different districts. So you're having to deal with these 50% of my kids come from this primary LEA, and that's where your Title I, II, III, and IV come from. And that's where your school resides. That's your primary LEA. But I also have 25% of my students that come from this school. And that happens, I know, a lot in your guys' region. This happens with those schools we just brought on in East St. Louis. There's a significant number of students from Cahokia. So we're actually working with both districts to try to pool those resources together, all under East St. Louis. So you might have different pockets of students from different LEAs. You can ask your primary LEA to manage all of the funds from those other LEAs so that you're only dealing with one LEA, consulting with one LEA, rather than having consultation with 3 different LEAs, which should mean 12 different meetings, all for different pockets of students with varying amounts of money, and having to keep track of all that. So this is the wave of the future. This actually is easier on the LEAs. It's easier on the private school principal, because now all your kids are being serviced under one LEA, and those other LEAs are just sending their money to another another public school, your primary LEA, to manage the funds on their behalf. It's a great way to do it, and you get a lot more bang for your buck, and the simplicity of managing it goes way up. Any questions so far, Laura?
Yes, there are a couple questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fire
Yeah,
away.
it's going to break in here. One principal said that in the spring he's required from the LEA to share how the funds are the funds allocated are going to be used. He has to give a breakdown of how each dollar is going to be spent. And is that reasonable?
As long as, well, it goes back to the equitable issue. If they are requiring that of all their principals, yes. So if you know somebody in the district, you might want to just give them a call and say, hey, so it comes down to relationships. A lot of you guys I know are connected to your public schools in some way, or you know somebody. Just find out if they have to do it. If not, then you can push back and say, I know your public schools aren't having to provide you the same information. I'll provide you what they provide you, but it's not, that's the equitable issue. They can't ask you for more documentation than they're asking from their own principals in the public system.
Okay. The other question is regarding subs. So when teachers are attending professional development during the school day and needs a sub, the question is, does your LEA pay for your sub using title monies? Because in this case, the LEA pays their public school teachers out of the title funds, but will not allow this Lutheran school to use the same funds because they say those teachers are not part of that LEA payroll.
As my boss would say, oh, nay, nay, that does not meet equitable participation. Okay. So I would push back, load your guns. If you don't want to force a relationship issue with them, then I would just loop in your state ombudsman and say, this is the issue. I know this to be true. Here's the guidance that speaks directly to it. You would pull up the equitable share and describe the scenario and say, they're doing this, we're not getting the same thing. That's not equitable. The state ombudsman, usually what happens in that case where you have, you know you're right, is they'll have a conversation behind the scenes with the district, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, yep, we can actually do that now. And so that's
How
usually the
about that?
resolution. Yeah, it usually works. If not, and if the state ombudsman wants to be difficult and take their side, then, you know, people, I've only had to do that a couple of times, but we have people in the Office of Non-Public Instruction that work under Betsy DeVos that we can send as kind of like the step between ombudsman and the federal government to say, this is the situation we're in. Can you give us your interpretation of what should be happening? And usually that language, just a response from them saying, oh no, it should be going this way, is enough for the ombudsman and the district to say, okay, we need to rethink this. And sometimes the ombudsman just needs to be better educated on how that should work. And that's the unfortunate thing about ombudsman. Some are huge advocates of private schools. Some are Iowa, horrible advocates of their private schools. So you get every end of the spectrum, even in that office.
Okay. All right. Thanks. That's all the questions for now.
All right. Legislation. Ugh. So this is where I fear for you guys the most, and probably where trust me, I'm really not trying to sound salesy. This is where we can help you the greatest, because right now you guys are juggling what should be huge buckets of money that the LEAs don't even know what they're doing with. And you're trying to figure out what you can and can't use things for. I was just looking up at the Missouri documentation this morning on ESSER funding and how it's distributed, what the uses of funds are, that awesome document that I'm sure you all got on what can be used for ESSER funding. And we'll get to ESSER here in a second, but it's really confusing on what is available to use under ESSER, because a lot of the parameters were lifted, especially on the definition of professional development versus title. So everything now, because it's shifting towards the funds coming through the Title I mechanisms, a lot of states that were initially in the lawsuit that didn't like the way Betsy DeVos told them to distribute the money, their interpretations are much more along the lines of stringent Title I. And that's not the intent of the law either. There's a lot of parts of the law that were intended to give some breathing room to deal with COVID, even using your title funding. But especially with ESSER funding, there should be a lot of opportunity in a lot of different ways to use your ESSER funding. The problem is you have 4 buckets of money. Don't forget too, you've got your regular ESSA funding that's coming out this year, but you all should have everything you didn't spend last year should come over at 100%. Remember, the CARES Act actually did away with the 15% cap of rollover. So anything you didn't use last year should come over as either added into your regular funding or a separate account that is rollover from 1920. So make sure you ask for these 4 allocation amounts. If they took your rollover and just rolled it into your 2021 funding, ask them what it was, because you want to make sure that what you think you had left over is actually what they had left over and rolled into your funding. East St. Louis was actually able to give us an exact figure of rollover for Sister Thea, and it was a decent amount. It was like $21,000. So it made an impact in their service. So make sure you get your rollover amounts from your LEAs. The CARES Act. So the CARES Act, as you know, is heavily debated based on whether you're a Republican or a Democratic state. And I'll use Nebraska and Illinois as 2 examples. Even though Illinois was one of the primary lawsuit people that took on the federal government on distribution, they actually allocated some of the ESSER funds to schools to use, and they held the rest of the money in trust, like they were instructed to do, to see what would happen with the lawsuit. Well, as many of you may be aware, last week, Betsy DeVos got ruled against, and she's dropping her push to have it rolled, to have the ESSER distributed based on solely enrollment. So it's going to come to you through Title I. So if you're not a Title I eligible school, you will receive nothing. This has a direct impact on private schools. And fast forward to upcoming legislation, the one thing that we're doing now is a call to action. Call your legislature whoever you have contacts to, make sure your parents do. Tell them to include private schools in the next CARES 2.0 or whatever they end up calling it, because private schools were intentionally left out by Congress because of the Title I distribution method that they wanted to have put in place. Now, Betsy tried to get private schools their fair share by changing it to more of a Title II distribution method. She lost, probably political, where she's going to bow out now of this push. She dropped her interim guidance, probably because I'm assuming President Trump's administration said, we don't need this right now, let it go. And maybe there's talks that they're going to fix it in the second round of legislation, and possibly even make up some of the money that was already distributed to private schools in the government's eyes inappropriately, to refresh those coffers so that the LEAs that did distribute it based on enrollment don't have to come up with the money. So there's a lot of different things in conversation that are going on. However, with this new ruling, and with Secretary DeVos dropping her push on the distribution, there's a perfect example is the high school that I told you about that my kids go here, Pius X. They were allocated $160,000 just because of their enrollment for ESSER. Had they only been able to get it through Title I means, they would have gotten zero because they're not a Title I school. So there's a huge loss for a lot of private schools where it was either zero or it was basically their Title I allocation all over again under ESSER. So it's really impacted a lot of private schools. I hope all of you receive something, at least through the Title I means. Hopefully, if you're not a Title I school, then of course you didn't receive anything. But that conversation is coming again. If you are spending ESSER money, hopefully you'll have more coming in a 2.0. But unfortunately, until the Senate is willing to support the states, I don't think we're going to see additional education fund relief. That's kind of the holdup right now. Is the Senate doesn't want to send more money to the states, which includes then educational coffers, and obviously the House does. So it's really still unknown. There's a lot of stuff going on behind closed doors in conversation. So the best guess we have right now, and we're plugged in at facts to the government pretty deep, but that's our best guess right now. And schools that were given ESSER that shouldn't have gotten ESSER are being told, spend your money, get a PO, and get stuff purchased under those funds, because it's all going to go away and they're going to freeze it at any moment. So just kind of an FYI. So we're here to help. There's lots of things that FACTS does. You guys have some great RVPs. A lot of you probably know Chris Gahan. He lives in Lincoln here with me. Matt McLean, who lives in Chicago, has been doing a lot of SIS stuff in the region down there. You guys have a great team of FACTS product representatives that a lot of you are probably on our FACTS SIS or using our tuition management program or grant and aid. Like I said, at the far right of the screen, you'll see FACTS Education Solutions. Those are all the things that we do. So we're no longer the redheaded stepchild that's brand new to the family. We're actually a pretty significant portion of FACTS now. But with the product suite, there is some advantages to having all of us. The reporting mechanisms, the ability for FACTS tuition and grant and aid to pull your poverty data out to send to the LEAs. There's a lot of good reasons to have the full product suite, but at the same time, I know that, in my old school, I wasn't able to bring SIS on because it was an investment up front. They did it the year after I left, last year, of course, but they weren't willing, the board wasn't willing to make the investment up front to get it all set up and do everything that they did now. Thank God they did, because the components of the SIS have made virtual learning a lot easier. FACTS Ed, this is our mission. It's to change the trajectory of a child's life. Simple, basic, and this is the way we do it. By helping manage all of these buckets of money that we just went over, trying to give time back to you guys. The thing that I hear time and time again is, you guys don't have time. I know I didn't have time. I didn't have COVID I was dealing with when I was a president and a principal. I didn't have the time to really look at this very deeply. That's why I traveled around the state of Montana and did a lot of that work for the other private school principals. But we also want to add value to your schools. Better services, more bang for your buck, The biggest way we do that, just to be honest with you, when I take over services from an LEA for a private school, we almost double the amount of hours of instruction. That's pretty standard across the board. LEA matrices for their employees that they hire are just so much higher than private schools. We're still paying a just wage, $20, $25 an hour for retired senior teachers from a private school that want to come back and do it, $30 an hour. I mean, we're still able to give a good solid salary, but we're able to stretch the dollars so much further. Our number one mission is to provide great service, which means you have contact with me on a regular basis. You have contact with an account manager that handles all the day-to-day operation. We have instructional service manager that oversees everything that's available, a PD manager that works on behalf of all of us. So you got a team behind you rather than just an individual LEA contact that hopefully you're having a good communication, or you have a good communication link with. I know that's not always the case. So that's what we really try to do is replace that poor communication, that poor management with good services, solid communication, and as much bang for the buck as we can get you without taking a penny out of your own operation budgets. So this is all federal money. We never touch yours. We just put together programs for you, document it, put a proposal together, goes to the LEA, they turn that into a contract, and we implement services. Coaching's a big one for us. We just rolled out a huge coaching program, and again, to give principals time back. We heard time and time again, especially last spring, principals just don't have time to do the instructional coaching that we all hope that they have time to do. And when they try, it typically becomes an issue with, is it evaluation or is it coaching? Because when you're in that power relationship with the teacher, it's hard for teachers not to see it as an evaluative tool. So we actually have a full-blown instructional coaching program. We want to be, somebody that you trust, but we want to really take the management of those 4 buckets we talk about. We want to take that off your plate, so you don't have to deal with them. We report to you, as often as you want, but at a minimum once a month on spend downs, and services that you need are just shot to us via a link and an online form, and Brian Voteva takes care of everything. Even if it's ordering, 10 Chromebooks using ESSER funds, that's just submitted in a quick document. He takes care of it, buys it, gets it stamped at the district because it's their property. Even the ESSER property is theirs, and he takes care of it, gets it to the school, and you use it. So we really are all about giving time back. Here's an example of doubling hours. This is one of the schools that I did a proposal for. $10,000 Title I allocation. The district was spending $53 an hour for wages and all the payroll taxes, benefits, and dues and fees and all the stuff that they had in their bargaining agreement. So the school was getting 189 hours for the whole year. That's how many hours of instruction they got for their kiddos. When we did ours, our all-in costs, we billed back at $28 an hour. This was a $20 an hour teacher, and the $8 included taxes, benefits, instructional software, training, all the compliance documentation that we have to send to the LEA. We were able to get them 357 hours of instruction for the year. So we nearly doubled it. This is what we do. One thing that we really try to do is to become a real true partner with you. We want to know how your students are doing. If there's PD that are specific to the answer to these questions, how are your students doing, that we can directly impact using your title funds for PD. We can hit these very specific and unique needs of your school head on. And Tiffany Wilbur and her team for PD, we have experts with PhDs and all sorts of stuff all over the country that can do virtual. We did 300 virtual webinars, 1-hour workshops in August alone. And a lot of them were instructing in the virtual age, dealing with COVID issues, and it was also, how to deal with students that are struggling. There's a lot of mental and emotional issues that we're dealing with right now, not just in our students, but in our teachers and you guys in your leadership roles. You're already in an isolated position, and having people like Laura are awesome, great partners. I'm here for you, but we also know that with your fellow principals, this is a hard time. And we have provided PD and emotional support counselors and different people. We've brought them on and provided services through ESSER funds, just because it's directly related to COVID. And we bring somebody in for a certain number of hours a week, in a lot of cases virtually, to have office hours and to be available. And they're working with teachers and they're working with building leadership to make sure that they're doing okay. So there's a lot of ways that we can assist in just the partnership levels of dealing directly with teacher and principal needs. Most commonly used purposes for title and ESSER funds, all of these instructional services we talked about, PD, coaching has really become the big one. Here's a myriad of a lot of the sessions. This is 10% of the 300 sessions we did last month. I just grabbed some of the most common ones. You can see Seesaw being used by some of the K-5s was pretty common. Google Classroom training, we did an intro, intermediate, and advanced courses. Keeping rigor in the classroom, even though it's virtual, how to give assessments online, etc. So we did a lot of different things. Every single one of these sessions was developed specifically for the unique needs of a school or a diocese or a consortium or a group like LESA that decided to pool together and do a PD day virtually. Our teacher coaching program, it really is simplified. It's 6 weeks, hyper-focused on a particular area of instructional need for a teacher that they might need the most assistance in. Even if you don't have a lot of money to give to PD, coaching is a really good one. It's very affordable. It could be done all virtually. When we do get to go back and travel again and get to schools, we really like the blended model because we have a very unique software called Mosaic that we use. That was actually, it's our own software. We developed it based on a coaching program that some of you might have heard of called Huddle. Our company, our parent company, Nelnet, actually owns the majority share of Huddle. And Huddle is based out of Lincoln, Nebraska, if you didn't know that. But Huddle is used by NFL teams all the way down to Little League teams for coaching kids up. Well, we turned that into a coaching teachers up and leadership training and coaching. So realistically, there's a lot of benefits for administrators, and when Laura sends this out, this will all be in here, so you can kind of get more information on it. But if you just go to factset.com, you'll see all of this as well. There's a lot of great things. It's really freeing up administrators. Actually, Dr. Brockberg, who is the superintendent for the Lutheran schools in Indiana, I went to Indianapolis and presented on Monday. He and I had a long conversation. We're going to meet with his team and talk about this statewide in Indiana and his portion of Kentucky that he oversees, and see if we can get some coaching going, because he knows his principals are just strapped and just can't get to this kind of stuff. And it's title eligible. So it comes out of your federal coffers, and that's a benefit. There's a benefit for teachers. It's a nice, the system that we use, this Mosaic, it looks just like this. There's a great screenshot of it. You see on the right-hand side, we've got Lloyd Danielson's instructional domains, and the video is tracked on the bottom. And it's really simple for teachers just to even put their iPhone on a stand in the back of the room, push play, and they teach for an hour. As soon as they turn off the play button, it automatically uploads, and only the coach, or only the teacher would receive it first. They could share it with the coach, and they can actually go in and type up and pinpoint areas in their instruction and communicate back and forth on how their day went. Were they communicating with students only on the left-hand side of the room? You didn't see, or your eyes didn't even move to the right-hand side, directly about the instruction they were providing, whether it's math or English. So the tool itself is unbelievable. God, I wish I had this when I was a principal. The Lord only knows that if I'd had something like this, my teachers probably would have gotten a lot more out of me and a lot more out of coaching, and it wasn't just about evaluation. So it's a great tool. So again, just want to reiterate this. We want to give you time. We want to provide you value, service, and then coaching, we think is really going to change the industry, because we think that it's going to revolutionize instruction in the classroom. So with that, there is my Q&A slide. I know I blew through a lot of stuff towards the end especially, but I am here to answer any questions, and we'll just leave this up so you have my digits now, later today, tomorrow, next week, next month. you can reach out to me at any point. I am here to help.
Wow, thank you so very much, Jeremy. That's a lot of great information. A lot of great services that FACTS provides. I hope most of you, so all our schools are FACTS schools from our grant, or the scholarship
Awesome.
program.
Good.
So I know
That's what I
I
thought.
receive information on a lot of the webinars, and so I hope that each of you have been receiving invitations over the summer from all the
Just a little bit going on.
yeah, just a little bit, just a little bit, right?
And the upgrades to SIS and everything else have been monumental just in response to COVID. So hopefully everybody's getting what they need,
Right.
even in those other parts of FACTS. So
are there any other, we have time for, we have like 2 minutes left. So anyone, you can unmute yourself even. There are no new questions in the chat box. So anyone have any final questions? 1 or 2 we have time for?
everybody really has to use the bathroom. Just let me walk away for a minute. And that's okay too, because if you guys think of something or you want to just email me directly with a question that's more specific to your situation, great, shoot it to me. I'll respond as quick as I can. I am heading to Boise, so if I don't get back to you, I'm usually really good at returning emails quickly. If for some reason there's a delay at all, it's only because I'm at a wedding. But other than that, I'll be responding as quick as I can.
Well, I have a quick question. My LEA is saying that they only will write checks to individuals to reimburse for items. So then that means they'll write me this big check and then I will turn it over to the school. Are they allowed to say that? I guess they don't want to write the check directly to the school.
Yep, they can't give, money can't pass to the school.
Okay.
That is correct for them. It sounds like I'm just plugging facts, but another reason why a third party is nice is because we can reimburse people right away if they made a payment, or we can pay for them and just bill out of your title funds. So, but that's the limitation that LEAs have with the private non-publics, is money can't flow between the two of you. So it has to flow to a third party, or it has to flow directly to an individual. And that's hard to, sign up for PD events 6 months in advance and pay a registration fee and not get reimbursed until after the event. So we carry that burden. We'll, if they sign up and submit for a reimbursement under your title funds, and you've authorized that through our system, then we'll pay them back. And then at the end of the session, they'll send us the documentation, and we'll send it in that next month with all of our invoicing that, Jeremy Beck attended for Trinity Lutheran, attended a PD workshop, cost them $500. They've been reimbursed. Here's the invoice to get that back for us. It's a great question though, because it does happen. Believe it or not, IDEA is confused with title. There's a school in your area that I talked to recently that has people come over and test for IDEA issues, speech issues, whatever, and they were billing the time for those specialists to come over and test out of title. That is 100% inappropriate. 2 different buckets of money, 2 different programs, just stuff like that. That's goofy. Sometimes it's just, okay, let's educate the LEA on, you can't do that. And there's a gentle way to do that, or there's a very direct way to do that. And so I just spend a lot of time with that principle saying, okay, here's the best way based on your relationship to attack this, to make sure that it gets resolved so that doesn't happen in the future.
Thank you again, Jeremy, for your time. We're going to wrap things up for this segment so that, as you mentioned, I think probably